And apparently we're live. Welcome, everyone, to Jim and Rob Overanalyze Movies, the live video podcast for people who love to talk about movies as much as they love watching them, and perhaps even more. Of course, this is the place. It's the home of the best chat on the internet, the place where we like to go beyond the review to talk about the story, the craft, the meaning of the films we watch today. Speaking of the films we watch today, tonight we are going to be talking about Amazon Studios' The Electrical Life of Louis Wain, a biopic, an Oscar bait biopic. But first, before we get into that, I think it's time to bring in my wonderful co-host, the man with the most, Mr. Jim Chaboyko. How you doing, my friend?
Good. I'm a little. It's been a day. It's we got a winter storm outside. The Bombers toyed with kicking themselves out of the playoffs, and they just finished the Great Canadian Bake Off, which my wife made me sit through. Very tense, especially the 3-tier cake at the end. I don't want to give anything away, but
nor should you.
A certain one of the three had a good day and the other two didn't. Anyway, but yeah, a lot of drama today. I'm wrung out, so I'm ready to do something nice and mellow and talk about movies.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. How about you?
I'm good. In the grand scheme of things, could things always be better? Absolutely. But I am looking forward to tonight's show. I think we got a good movie, but we also got a couple of things before we talk about The Electrical Life of Louis Wain. Why don't we? First of all, why don't we start with you, Jim? You had sent me an article, and I think also Walt Vlad 65, Walt from Walt's Flickspicks sent it to both of us from Slash Film. Why don't you tell us about that and what you thought of the article?
Well, it was just it's been such a long week now. It was about the sound quality of just the way, is dialogue getting harder to understand these days, but I'm just trying to think. It's been such a long week. This feels like it was about 2 weeks ago now that I read it, but I think you agreed with a lot of it. Did you not?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm failing. I was actually just looking up the other subject we're going to be talking about, but I'm blanking on the main points of it anyway. Remind me.
Oh yeah, I've got it up on the screen right now, I think, Jim. But here, let me try and get it a little out of the way.
Sure.
But basically, it was a take on, and I'm not going to say a hot take, but a take on why movie dialogue has gotten more difficult to understand. And I kind of liked the, here, let's get it behind us.
Nice. It's like a side wipe.
But basically it was a kind of, there's 3 possible reasons why this film may be, or why we're having a harder time hearing dialogue. And it's got nothing to do with, fortunately, us being older. Which is kind of nice. Some of it, and it's a mix of 3, eh? Some of it, certainly, let's say with Christopher Nolan, purposeful choice. Some of it, and this is interesting in the piece, was they're talking about how it's in the acting, which I thought was kind of interesting. A lot more. It's almost like a holdover from mumblecore, kind of a. It was the style of the time, I suppose. And then what else? What was another one, Jim? Here, let me see if I can find it. Yes. Here we are.
The last point
sound isn't respected enough on set, which has been, I remember when I was on film sets, working on film sets back in the late 90s and early aughts, that was the refrain then, not enough respect. And some directors do, some don't. Some talent does, some doesn't. There was one more kind of almost an honorary mention, technology. And I thought that was kind of cool. This idea that because these guys can do so much now, it almost becomes, well, why don't we do it? Of course we're going to do it. And I thought that was kind of, I thought that was sort of fascinating. You know what? That would be part of the conversation. You know.
Well, I just brought it up to remind myself, and there's points about music, there being too much music. And one of my pet peeves is when you have two different kinds of music going on at the same time. You have the diegetic stuff, and then the score comes out on top, and then there's dialogue on top. It's like, don't have two kinds of music going at the same time. And then sound effects.
Because they can do the full surround thing. You're like, wow, we have to dial up that explosion in the background so that the audience feels in the space. Meanwhile, they're like, I still can't hear what the actors are saying in front of me. Exactly. I didn't know I was at the bar.
Yeah.
What did you think? One of the other comments was the, and I'm first, I see in the chat here, let me put it up. DMG's brought up the back in my day. But there was a comment about the challenge of theaters, like standardization. You know what? Where the theater might be playing it lower and it's not actually, and then even the challenge of, okay, well, we'll do a separate mix for Netflix, but another streamer might have a different standard, and then some streamers just don't care. It's kind of a mishmash. So some of the problem may not really be the producer's fault. It could be further down the chain.
Yeah, I mean, the standardization, they've had problems with that in all kinds of industries, whether it's clothing, food, in this case, sound is, and I don't doubt that, certain companies are run by certain people, right? And they all have their likes and dislikes and their built-in biases and things like that. So that doesn't, their way of doing things and the settings that they like, that kind of thing. So that doesn't surprise me at all. But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff, and the quality of I think there's a note here about, I think it actually said home theater woes was one of
the headline. Yep.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, we have a little speaker
find it
downstairs that sort of, we can plug in if we want to, but it's kind of not always super consistent either. It's just a sort of a cheap $100 kind of add-on that I bought a few years ago, and sometimes it works better than others. But yeah, I can see the not respecting sound. I mean, when you're in an age in which the people that deal with the weapons, and I'm going to reference that Rust movie on which the cinematographer was killed. I mean, the armaments weren't being respected there. So you have to think that, probably the sexiest part of movies is, technically is probably the camera stuff, right? And then everything else, I imagine, falls by the wayside. Yeah. I say camera stuff just to be silly, but, cinematography and that kind of thing. But, it's not a field for the impatient. And there's a lot of different setups to be done, obviously. I mean, you've been on film sets way more than I have, but, Mark Maron talks about just going to set, recording something for 5 minutes and then waiting in your trailer. So, but that's from the acting, acting side. So.
Well, but it's a real, it's how do I put this? Oh, sorry, everybody. I apparently got a little, look, there's a little electronic view behind the scenes. I think some of it is when we think of filmmaking, we think of the image, right? And we don't realize that sound, because it's not something we can see, and they talk about this in the article, but I've experienced it myself, because it's something we can't see. it becomes really easy to kind of blow off. The other thing, and that meets the technology piece. Oh, we'll fix it in post. I remember, and this was, won't name the movie because then it outs the director, but a movie I worked on, the director's telling this actor, and he was kind of bitching about the sound mixer. And he said, what they don't realize is they can just a fraction of a second and make it, that's all they need. And it's like, a mixer, a good editor, yeah, they can do a lot with a fraction of a second, but they hate it because it's never as good as just doing it properly at the beginning. You are trying to polish a turd, maybe, and it's one of those things where it's a little care at the beginning, and all of a sudden everyone down the pipeline is having so much easier time, and they can work on, because there's limited budgets, they can work on making it special instead of working on making it adequate or acceptable. And I think that's a big part of the problem, eh? The other thing is this bias that we do. It's like, well, how did one cinematographer say to a local guy, a Winnipegger actually, says, well, it is the filmmaking part of filmmaking. And he meant it sincerely. I'm giving it a little bit of spin only because I'm like, I don't think he means it arrogantly, but it's one of the most arrogant things you could ever say. Well, it's it's like, well, okay, yeah, it wouldn't be a film without it, but it wouldn't be film without a lot of things, so you could get rid of costumes, just let people show up and whatever. Is it going to be that good a movie? Yeah. And even when people, the silent era, even in the silent era, they were desperate to get any kind of sound in. Just watching it with no sound at all, no music, no nothing, makes for a terrible experience. I agree with the others. I'm on the other side of this, Jim. It's sound is the secret sauce of great film. A great film has a great soundtrack. Anyway,
it's one of those things whenever they do if you're watching the Oscars and they have that little sort of, and now the award for sound, there's actually 2 different sound awards, I believe, but and then they show a sampling of them.
They combined it now. It's all sound design.
Have they? Okay.
Yeah, it's used to be sound editing and sound mixing, but now it's all under sound design. Which is, having done a little bit of it myself, I'd say, that probably is that's a good capture.
Yeah, but they would show these nice little montages of sound and the difference they made and scenes in which, they had to bring out the sort of the trickery and that kind of thing, and all the, just sort of raise the bar, right? Yeah. And it always, you'd be like, oh yeah, and then for about 2 weeks you'd totally respect sound, and then you go back to sort of ignoring it. It's like after you go again, like I mention often, you go to one of those Pops concerts and all of a sudden music's super important to you, and you sort of are paying more attention to it. So
well, and again, part of it is it's just hard to see. Mm-hmm. We all, and the camera kind of takes primacy even on set. It's like the camera crew, and that tight little team, and everyone's in their little cliques. And then you have the sound guys. It's like 2 or maybe 3, sometimes on a really big film where they might have a couple of utility players, a mixer and or a sound recordist, and 2 boom operators. So 5, maybe, I think I only ever worked on movies with a mixer and a boom operator, and once in a while a utility, kind of an assistant, a utility who also did second boom operating when required. That's the biggest sound crew I ever saw, And even as expensive as their gear is, the camera is $250,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you want lenses with that? Oh, well, sir. So it becomes this sort of, there's just this massive weight around the camera on set, like psychological, not physical and psychological. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it too, we often know the direct, obviously the actors, they're the most visible, but often know even the most passive fan names of directors, writers, sometimes even camera guys, the cinematographers, sorry, the sound, the score, the composer, but I don't know anybody that could you name a sound professional involved with the movies?
Yeah.
I don't know that you would be able to, unless that's pretty inside baseball.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Jim. Agree with you 100%. Listen, let's move on to our second topic. I know this is something I dumped on you like last night, but some of it as I was going to use the smart remark, oh, Jim, the millennials are triggered. And that's unfair. Mostly because Ridley Scott is the one who is blaming millennials in part for the reason the Last Duel didn't have a big opening box office and hasn't really gotten a lot of traction since. I think I suspect it might be hard to find it in the theaters now. For those of you who don't know, The Last Duel came out in October. I think actually our friend DMG brought it up in his October. Hey, I'm kind of looking forward to this. But it's actually a historical, drama based on a real incident, the last judicial duel in France between these two knights. It's about a sexual assault, and where the husband has challenged the knight who is alleged to have perpetrated the sexual assault on the first night on the accuser's spouse. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it stars Matt Damon, Jodie Comer, who we talked about back in the summer in Free Guy, of course, Ben Affleck, and that Adam Driver. Now, it's interesting as now some millennial, God, I hate these marketer made up references to demographics, right? They don't exist. It's strictly a marketer's scam, right? But anyway, these folks are identifying themselves as millennials and saying, well, that's not fair. And some of it's almost listen, old man, no, we're not just watching on our phone, but maybe we can't afford to go to the theater. All these reactions. And I'm like, I think you're all missing the point here. And I wanted to kind of bounce this off you, Jim. You look at The Last Duel. First and foremost, this was a movie that I would argue was not aimed at a younger demographic. It's, 25 and up. So you're already going to look at a smaller hit. Mm-hmm. And then, and I suspect Ridley in some ways is just spouting off because he's mad, and maybe also just want to admit that maybe his film sucked wind, that it just wasn't that good. It didn't get the great word of mouth. It wasn't getting great critic reviews or anything. So you aimed at, it was already a niche. Well, maybe not a niche, but yeah, adult film goers that just, the older you get, the less you go to a movie. Mm-hmm. And maybe it wasn't that good, but I'm almost thinking it was also small. Like, yes, it's about a duel, but it wasn't like The Knight's Tale was big. Like, they tried to make it feel big. Even when the big duels in A Knight's Tale were happening, the jousting and everything, it still felt like the space was big. Whereas you look at even the trailers, it's a lot smaller. And all I could think of is this movie should have went to Netflix. It should have been on Amazon. It should have been on Prime. You were never going to make big bank in the theaters. Do your Oscar bait thing, have a limited release, and then spin it out to theaters where people can discover it. And, but I was like, kind of, it's not about millennials. It's, hey, you limited your market. Like, Jodie Comer's up and coming, but she's not exactly top of mind to anyone. Adam Adam Driver, definitely a big deal, but also known for doing art stuff, not necessarily, going to capture that 14 to 18 crowd. And Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, definitely more, the 25 and older, even 30 and older crowd is going to be, I know who those are and I want to see them. It just seems like a dumb thing. And, Ridley Scott doesn't want to accept that maybe his film wasn't that amazing. Not saying it was bad. Critics' reviews weren't, this sucks. But the critics' reviews, and plus, the other thing is, Jim, I got to admit, you think about it, in this day and age, do you want to do a movie about a sexual assault and then, because they did it in kind of a Rashomon style, there's the accuser, the accused, and then the, let's say the accuser formally is the guy because of the historical context. There is the victim or alleged victim, but literally they decide to do something about sexual assault where 2 of the 3 views are going to be with the guys. It's like, where's your head at? I mean, and even as I thought about it more, Jim, I'm like, it would be so much more an interesting film. What if they just did it from Judy Comer's position? I'm not saying don't have moments of the Adam Driver's character or Ben Affleck's character. You know what? But from the most part, it could have been a really cool examination of both the incident, the historical context, and a discussion of sexual assault. Just by putting primacy on the lady, the truly the lady of the manor, the noble woman who was wronged here, who was assaulted here, and her conversations with her ladies in waiting, and the pressures, like not just 1/3 of the movie, but most of the movie. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I am way more interested in that. You can still have the duel. You can still, it's still a great hook. What are you talking about? The last judicial duel. Why did they have that? But even like the risk to her, if her husband had lost, historically he won, but if the husband had lost, what would happen to her? And although that's discussed in the last duel, it could have and should have had primacy. It should have been 80% of the movie, and everyone else is a supporting character. What do you think?
Well, I mean,
now that I've dumped all of that on you, talk about Millennials, talk about Ridley Scott. Accept my pitch for a different movie.
0.1 of 47. This makes Green Knight look like the Three Stooges. No, I don't know. In terms of the lack of success, I went over the trailer. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I might see it. I went over the trailer earlier today, and I just thought, we'll get the people into the theaters. Let's make Matt Damon look older. That'll bring in the crowds. And feature Ben Affleck as a sort of a Ponzi king. Let's give him blonde hair and make him affect the sort of neutral mid-Atlantic accent. That'll totally do it. It looks like a heavy movie, and it in this day and age, if you look at the things that have succeeded, they're either sort of some sort of escapism, like Dune. I mean, which you can also say is a heavy movie, but I think Ghostbusters is not doing too badly. There's a number of them, and they all seem to be a bit lighter. Like, hey, should we go see this Last Duel or Medea battles COVID? I think it's.
Sorry.
That's
funny.
But it's just it's. I don't think it. He's 84. It's sort of like when Tom Wolfe a few years back wrote a novel about college girls, and I thought, why would I want to read this? It's like, is this his take on current sexual mores and how the past is reflecting the present? something like that. It from that aspect, I hardly think that Ridley's got his finger, on the, or his ear on the ground, or whatever the saying is. I don't know. I to blame like the crowds for the lack of interest in the movie seems to, and especially with this topic at this time, sort of post-COVID. I know some people are going to movies, others aren't. It seems to be misguided. Often the people that are angriest are really angry at themselves. You know what I mean? But and then there was this thing this weekend where he was doing some junket for it and trying to create goodwill or what have you, and he ends up basically saying "F you very much" to a Russian journalist over and over, while Jodie Comer's in the next chair. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. And she just sort of smiles and looks into the distance. He's going, "F you very much. F you, F you, F you." And the guy would, he said, this looks more realistic than a couple of your last period pieces. But the guy's Russian. Like, I remember trying to use the term irony back when I lived in Japan, and it didn't work. Like, I just ended up dropping. It's like, fuck, this is too much for me. I'm not going to deal with irony in Japanese. But like the actual term irony. But which I can't remember what it is anymore. But I just, to have 2 hours plus probably of toxic masculinity in this day, darkest time of the year, pre-Christmas release schedule, right in the middle of COVID. People aren't sure if they're wanting to go back to the movie theaters or not. I don't know.
Well, the tone, but again, there was I think there was a more interesting film in this. But partly it's like, really, you're going to give 2 of the 3 voices to the guys? It's like, even this 50s middle-aged white guy kind of goes, "Oh, are you reading the room here?" But like you said, he's it's something Matt was talking about. I just kind of saw out of the side of my eye about, and it's going both ways. It's, it's these boomers. It's like, they're not the fault of everything. Rich boomers are. Just as rich Gen X, our generation. These are all mostly class issues. Got nothing to do with age. Anyway, why don't we, before we get into the film, let's take, we got an active chat. Let's quickly say hi to everyone. Sure. Of course, I referred to Matt. Matt, good to see you here. Our man from down under. Also, DMG, Brian, in our man in Nevada. Good to see you. Of course, we got Jelly Duck Ahmed in Kuwait City. Good to see you.
We do.
And sorry, everyone, I'm going to quickly move up the thing. Oh, Richard L. Woof.
Check in.
Good to see you, man. I hope Katie is with you there. But great to see you guys. Welcome. And they did. I just want to kind of quickly look at the chat and kind of bring up some of their comments, Jim, before we move into the movie, especially as we brought up a couple of issues. All right, here we go. Jelly Duck referring to film scores. Apparently 65 and sunny in Vegas. Jerk.
It's nasty here.
I'm not biting on that, DMG, regarding Lady Gaga. All right. Sound can be, Matt makes an interesting point. Sound can be seen if you have synesthesia. Absolutely right. And then Matthew, the self-proclaimed millennial, is the millennials, the generation that grew up with South Park and Family Guy, and they wonder why we're so sensitive. I'm not quite understanding that comment, but all right. Oh, but this is interesting. Millennial actually came as a term from William Strauss and Neil Howe, who had an American generational theory in the late 80s and 90s. Ooh, I'll have to look that up. I may stand corrected, Jim.
Okay.
Actually, I am going to search that right now. You can even see, folks, I am copying that, and I will paste it over here just to have it in here, because I want to look that up. Because, yeah, I'm not giving up yet, folks. My feeling that any of these generational references are horseshit. That is not to say that my opinions, worldview is different than my 75, 76, or 78, I guess. Oh my goodness, he's old. My late 70s father. I just don't, unlike the baby boom where they really could say, well, here's the age pyramid, and then this is what distorted it. The only thing sociologists, kind of identified, no, there's something that really happened here. Everyone else, it's more like we think there's a cluster of attitudes and opinions that come around a cohort. I think that it's basically been exploited by marketers to say, well, they're fundamentally different. Although I've had arguments with friends about that too. Anyway, but thanks for bringing that up. I've searched it. Matt, okay, where else were we, Jim? What else were we talking about? Oh, okay.
Scanning the chat.
DMG says he loves Ridley Scott, and he thinks he can fairly knock millennials for lots of stuff. But Ridley should have made a better movie than that didn't do 3 45-minute acts covering the same ground. Good point.
It's like Dunkirk.
Oh, and then I guess Strauss and Howe were also the inspiration for the documentary Generation Zero, which was blaming the baby boomers for most of the world's issues. And this is where I'm really looking forward to digging in, because it's like, you know what, the baby boomers aren't a monolith. Most of that is, if you don't factor in class, I think any analysis is fundamentally flawed. But I'm going to look that up. All right.
Well, it's just another way of saying that every generation is different. It's just it's sort of a way to codify it, I think, which is sort of it's common sense.
Well, and also that every generation is different, but which is easy to say, and you can pick surface things, but I suspect I have in the fundamentals a lot more in common with some working class guy, even in the 30s, as far as certain values, than I do with a rich, let's say a rich Gen Xer, and definitely interest. I have way more, my interests, my political interests, my economic interests, I have a lot more in common with a poor millennial, like a so-called millennial, but somebody poor in that class, than, just because it's oversimplifying something when we say, well, we know the same music. It's like, there are more important things in life than that, let's say the working class and the squeezed middle class have found amongst those millennials are going, oh, wow, there is a difference because I don't have the money I thought I would. But there are rich millennials who are not having that problem, because their parents were rich Gen Xers, because their parents were rich boomers, because their parents were, anyway. All right, enough of my Marxist ranting. And Matt's, of course, it's summer in Australia. Apparently it's 28 degrees Celsius and sunny. Because when I think of rainy, cloudy days, I think of Perth. All right. Katie has chimed in. Oh, where she says, I've been sitting quietly, stewing in anger after being reminded of Nolan's muffled dialogue sound recording. All right. On that note, I think it is time to let's get to our movie, Jim, and I'll let me let me show you how fancy I've got this rigged. And I will go to the Rob focus. Take that off, throw that on. Okay, we're going to talk about this movie. All righty, everybody. As I said before, it's a biopic, The Electrical Life of Louis Wain. That's the movie we're looking at. The log line from IMDb is English artist Louis Wain rises to prominence at the end of the 19th century for his surreal cat paintings that seemed to reflect his declining sanity. It was directed by Will Sharpe, written by Simon Stephenson and Will Sharpe. It stars Benedict Cumberbatch, Claire Foy, Andrea Riseborough, and Toby Jones. I would say regarding I didn't have a chance to. Well, I shouldn't say I didn't have a chance to put up to create the social nutrition checklist. I forgot it, and then it was 10 minutes to showtime, and I'm like, maybe I can pull it. Oh, I'm not pulling this together. But folks, I can say, yeah, does it? I do have a score for it. Does it qualify for the reframe stamp? No, it does not. Did it pass the Bechdel test? No, it didn't. Is it union made? Yes, it is. And you know what? I don't know about you, Jim. I sided on I can't say this as a class consciousness, although there is a vision of, like a kind of a take on mental illness and poverty. I wouldn't say this is a class conscious film. It's more very similar to Jane Austen films, which are, the woes of the gentry, the middle class. And, so I couldn't do that. So I'm giving it a score of 25%. Okay. But would you have given it, what was your take on the class consciousness? Well, a little more sympathetic?
It sort of talks about standards isn't the right word, but it talks about the issues involved. But I guess they are sort of, despite their debt and standing, there are obstacles in their way. But I don't think they're all pretty much in the same boat as their neighbors. I would guess. I mean, they do move at one point, but they've got an entire house. They're never in penury, or they don't get sent to the debtor's prison at any point. Yeah. That kind of thing. So they worry about it.
No one has to spend some time in the poorhouse.
Yes, yeah. So there's mentions sort of made towards the direction, and you're made to think that every false move will sort of lead somewhere badly for the family. But it doesn't really. Well, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but I would probably agree with you. It's mentioned, but not. Yeah, it's not really delved into at all.
Yeah, and I do. You know what? We don't do half marks here. But there was certainly some sympathy for the. You know what? You're right. Yeah, I can't continue without getting into the spoiler zone.
Yes,
But I do. I think it's why I would never count a Jane Austen adaptation as class conscious, because it is so narrowly framed around the experiences of the gentry. He is a character is of that class. Okay. All right. Yeah. Let's get into it. We're in our 2-shot here. So I guess, Jim, we're in the quick review.
Mm-hmm.
What, tell me, my friend, what, give us your quick take on this.
Kick it off there. Well,
kicking it off, baby.
I've got a few notes here that I'll pretend I'm acting that I'm coming up with on the spot. The English, this is a kind of a project that the English seem to be able to do in their sleep, a period biopic featuring an overlooked person in English culture or UK culture. This one, and I'm not sure it fully gets there, but it attempts to have different beats to it. So it's not your typical sort of masterpiece theater, although that's television, I realize. It's not your typical masterpiece theater kind of thing. The narration done, I believe, by Olivia Colman. It even starts off kind of a little bit saucy, like it's not your typical, that arch writerly synopsis. So, as she actually mentions, this is Victorian age. Everything stank of shit. So that's sort of an indication that there's different beats here, and they're going for something a little bit different. Even with all they have all the usual trappings of a period piece, but a slightly different point of view. I'm not sure I'm not sure they give themselves fully over to that. There's really inspired moments of weirdness, the posing of people in certain situations. We get a look into the future, but I don't feel that was fully carried through. There were, like I said, I sort of wish they had sort of fully gone in that direction. For me, the story was kind of all over the place as well. I don't want to spoil it, but it changes about halfway through for various biopic reasons, and you lose something after the first hour. Again, we'll get into that after the spoiler zone. So what you're dealing with, is this movie ultimately about his life? Is it about his impact? Is it about being an artist with mental illness? Is it about cats? Is it about art? Is it about life? The cast was inspired, but I felt the story was sort of needed a little bit more guidance. And again, with something like this, it was a tad episodic. It was really episodic, actually. The scenes were not particularly long. I felt that they could have been longer. And there's 2 points at which I thought the movie was ending. All of a sudden, he's an old man, and you go, and this isn't giving anything away, I don't think. And then you go, okay, this must be the end of the movie. He's an old man. He's an older man, so he's got more old man makeup. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I liked it. It felt a bit like a television movie. Well, more like a streaming movie. I mean, we're sort of been discussing the qualities of a streaming movie. I liked it. Benedict's super watchable. But it sort of didn't fully give itself over to one vision or the other, I don't think. I still enjoyed it. I liked a lot of the performances, and period pieces are always fun. So that is my quick review.
All right. For myself, Jim, I would say I went into this flick kind of going, okay, what is this going to be? Is it going to be too cute? And the guy who wrote, there's a biopic about the guy who wrote the original Peter Pan, the playwright. Oh, what the heck is his name? Can't remember right now.
It's like J.A.B. McDonald. Or
yeah.
Like
Anyway,
I'll look it up.
Yeah, thank you. Starred Johnny Depp. And so I was kind of wondering, okay, is it going to be like that? Kind of cutesy and fun with some tragedy mixed in. But hope at the end. And yes, it delivers some of those beats. I do think and we'll get more into it later, and maybe Matt in the chat can add to this when we get more into it more later. I liked the way it kind of started with him as an eccentric, but functioning in the world. I thought we were going to be, it's almost like Mr. Chip's territory when he meets his wife and then they get married, but it's handled well. And you know what? She's at that midpoint of the film. Something happens. And by the end of it, I'm so taken by all these characters. I felt sad when I should feel sad. I felt hopeful when I should feel hopeful. I liked the look and feel of the film, even when it got, because it didn't get like Annette levels of arty. They're having some fun, which is absolutely fine. That is not a problem whatsoever. I got to admit, by the end of it, I'm like, what a nice, sweetheart little biopic. I like the way it kind of chose its moments. It's like, okay, well, not necessarily a young adult, but still youngish. The marriage, and then his decline, and then a nice little moment at the end, and I felt good. I was like, what a nice little slow burn, sweet, lower arc film that still managed to, except for Andrea Riseborough's character, which I thought that, there's kind of a tone shift with her, where I'm like, what? Where did this come from? I liked the portrayal of his mental illness, and that they were trying hard to show it from his perspective, and how terrifying it was for someone to be in crisis like that. And that you see moments where it's not presented at how dangerous he is, except to perhaps himself, but just how frightened he is, and how awful it would be for somebody going through that, and also how terrible it is on those around him, not not laying blame, and so I really liked that, you feel for the frustration of the sisters later on, and everything. So I gotta admit, I'm like, I was kind of taken with this film. There's my by the end of it, I'm like, I was not sure I was gonna, well, I can't say, enjoy might be the wrong word, but taken. I think I was taken by the end of it,
get something from it. No, I don't disagree. It is a smaller kind of an arc, not a low arc or no stakes movie, but it is a, and it did feel a little bit like a smaller picture than we usually get from in my opinion, from Benedict Cumberbatch. I will say though,
J.M. Barrie.
Yes, I didn't want to interrupt.
Finding Neverland.
There you go. But one thing that struck me is that very few movies portray insanity. It's almost like portraying war, and they without romanticizing it. And I think this one did not. Like that, there's one scene when he basically has night terrors. I won't get into it too much until after the spoiler zone. And you see it from the perspective of another person, and it's not a romantic. It's not like, no, this guy's sexy when he's having a meltdown. It's nothing like that. It's not like Kirk Douglas chewing scenery as Vincent
I know
Van
the
Gogh
moment you're talking about, and we can elaborate more in later, but I get you. I felt it.
Yeah.
I felt for him and for the guy, for both people in that scene.
Yes. Yeah. There's an old movie just quickly called Vincent and Theo with what's his name? Tim Roth as Vincent Van Gogh, and he's licking turpentine off a surface, and that was one of the first times I thought, man, being insane isn't as fun as the other movies, as they show in the other movies. And that was one of the first times I sort of learned to appreciate a portrayal that did not romanticize insanity or mental illness, which is I think a habit that Hollywood often gets into. So
well, it's I will put a pin in this, folks. This is the later on I am going to complain about the Queen's Gambit.
Okay,
but I think we're in the spoiler zone.
Okay. Everyone dies. No, I'm just kidding.
Let's, Jim, why don't we talk about The Craft? And
The
if you're
Craft.
cool with it, I'd love to start on this one.
Yeah.
Let me, let's change it. You know what I liked about this, everything had a nice, even though we were talking about sound before, I thought the sound was pretty solid.
Yeah.
In the moments when we're supposed to hear the environment, you feel like you hear the environment. But a lot of the stuff is in cozier little rooms, in the many houses that they're in, and you felt that. And because they're so stuffed with stuff, you know what? You really got to hear the dialogue. But going back to the stuffed environment, yeah, it's a cozy. It always had kind of a warm, cozy feel, except for those moments of, except for the moments where it shouldn't feel warm and cozy. It felt stuffed. I liked the moments where, early on in the film, we're being presented different colors. It's almost like a kind of a riff on, there's a great little tracking shot through a window early on. I think it's when Wayne is at some sort of party with his friends as a younger man, and they're looking at it through the window, and you see green, and then you see blue, and then you see red. And we always kind of had those filters going on and to give a certain vibe and texture. So I thought that was cool. I kind of rolled my eyes initially, and I might go back to rolling my eyes at a later date. But once I kind of got over my eye rolling about the pillar, the pillar box, because they presented it in 4:3 like old television. Which I gotta admit, I still think is kind of a little bit of a cinematic affectation. They could have just shot it in 69 and we all would have been fine. But yeah, you know what? I'll give the director, the cinematographer, an iota of, give him something in that it made it feel, again, back to cozy. I did, again, once I got over my eye rolling, I didn't notice it much later on. I thought although, and who knows, maybe there was a rights issue, although, it would have been nicer to see a little bit more art, like in doing my research, it would have been nicer to see a little bit more of art that kind of showed his progression as an artist, even as he was, he was institutionalized and everything. That I would have liked to have seen more of that. I don't think we saw enough of that, because some of it is super vivid and really kind of interesting. And I mean, shit, if you can see it on Wikipedia, I suspect they could have put it in there. But that's maybe more of a quibble. You know what? They weren't so making it so much about the art, and look at this guy who could somehow make this brilliant art, like you were saying, that romanticizing of mental illness. They were making it about the man. So, and his family and the effect on his family. So I thought that was, and the costumes are great. And yeah, the performances, I don't think there was, other than Andrea Riseborough's character, which is, I think, more of a story issue. I think even the look and the feel felt legitimate. Maybe there's somebody who's very familiar with the fin de siècle, and the Gilded Age and after early 20th century might say, nope, they never wore that, and that's not right. But I felt there was a progression. I felt it felt real. And yeah, damn, Toby Jones. But they were all good, but Toby Jones was fantastic. Claire Foy was fantastic. Benedict Cumberbatch was great. They're all solid,
Yeah.
And damn it, I'll see if I can't. Let me just grab her name. The woman who plays one of her. Yes. Haley Squires. She plays Marie Wain, her younger sister, who also had severe mental health issues. And she was great. I love the way that arc, they also established that, that maybe there was something going on when she was much younger. And then, when Haley Squires takes over and you see some of that. And I thought that was portrayed well, So yeah, that's my take on The Craft. What about you, my friend?
Yeah, I just I'm looking at my notes here. The cast was great. Benedict Cumberbatch sort of specializes in this vulnerable genius. I mean, he did it in the code breaking movie. He did Alan Turing.
The game.
Sherlock. Yeah. But the Sherlock, of course. Doctor Strange is literally broken into hundreds of pieces and then put back together. And he's excels at what he does. So he often does this thing, and I think his sort of superpower as an actor is doing that sort of vulnerable thing, like being able to be vulnerable. Which is why The Courier, which I've spoken highly of, it's also on Prime Video, is interesting because he plays just a regular schlub, like just an everyday kind of underperforming guy. But so I thought he was great. He's always watchable. He's always super watchable. Claire Foy, I really liked, and she was so, and this isn't here or there, but she's such a vivid. She's like the healthiest looking woman in the cast. She's got great presence, like super warm. I haven't seen her in much. I haven't watched the Crown yet, but I haven't seen her in tons of things. But I just really like her presence, so much so that it was hard to believe that she got sick. But that's just me probably. And then when her character, that's sort of one of the issues I had with this movie is that's the main relationship in this movie, and it ends after an hour. And nothing really replaces it. And you had a beautiful scene, one of the last scenes with them together, and he's basically thanking her for her presence. And that there's a stillness to that scene, and a length to the scene, and a gentleness. And it, for me, I would like to have had more of those kinds of scenes. And I think maybe.
So you liked her performance.
I loved it. Yeah,
because you're moving right into story. Stick with The Craft.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Toby Jones also, I thought, I think you just expressed admiration for him. He's a great presence as well. I like the locations a lot. There's no shortage of them, of course, in England. The pool that when he goes to the corner, Toby Jones's character, and they've got that great indoor bathing, what do they call it? A natatorium in prior ages. Of course, there's a big pool scene in Sherlock, the series. And I thought there was a lot of nicely things. This is going to seem like an odd note. The end credits, I love that calligraphy. I love that font. It's on the movie poster. Sure. I was like, wow, this is great. And what else?
And almost a very close color. The background color is, very close to this.
Yes. Yeah. Some of the art direction, I thought they could have delved into that a little bit. They had that one crazy scene where he's talking about looking into the future, and that was so weird, but it was so inspired as well. So I think there were a lot of, the narration I mentioned before. There is another little line I wrote down. He was the oldest and malest of the 6 siblings. So that was, just little things like that just made it seem a little bit different. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of it that came off well. But yeah, some of the other points that I have are going into story. But I had a good look. I love the costuming. I love the one-piece bathing suit that he wore, and in the swimming place, like a very old-timey kind of thing. And then, yeah, you say the costuming was great too. They're all walking down the street in black at one point. There's a texture to that scene as well. That's quite nice. There's a couple of things. When he was supposed to have been in New York, it didn't quite feel like New York. But I'm not gonna. I'll mention it, but aside from that, I'm not gonna quibble with it. We haven't mentioned cats yet. Some great cat work as I don't want to say owner, as the owner of two cats.
Yeah.
I watched this movie with a cat sleeping beside me, so that is my bona fides. But yeah, not a lot of cats in movies generally. There's probably a good reason for that, but some really good cat work, I think.
Great cat wrangling.
And Peter was when he finds Peter dead, that was like, no, Peter. That was a very sad moment, but
yeah. No, his collaborator.
Yes, yeah. And you always had that little red bow and stuff just so you could tell them apart from the other cats, of course.
Because they are cats.
Yeah.
Oh yes, unique like snowflakes in a big pile of snow. I think somebody in the comments, Matt brought up the green, blue, the RGB that I noted earlier. I think this movie would bear another watch to kind of look at just how color and mood. Like I did watch it today, and so, I took a few notes, but it wasn't like, I think it would bear a rewatch to kind of look at how they used color. And I say this because it was interesting. A little bit of an aside here, on the TikTok, and I saw someone who was talking about the Oedipal stuff going on in Dune. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It was the woman was actually talking about the relationship with Jessica and Paul. And I'm like, what? Okay, you know what? I don't see it, but maybe. But it got me thinking, and I can't believe we never kind of looked at this. Partly we were only looking at the first movie. But if you think to later books, it's like, yeah, Paul is Oedipus Rex. That doesn't make Jessica Jocasta. Anyway, parenthetical little sidebar thing done.
Okay.
Getting back to the movie we're talking about, what the point I'm trying to make there is there is something to be said. This is not our shtick. We watch the movie, we talk about the movie, but maybe rewatching it just to look at how they used color, because all those were conscious choices. They're meaning something, and could it even be a almost like a metaphor for how we're viewing this life? Here's the blue stage, and here's, the red and fiery, and here's the, I'd be interested in what other folks, if they maybe saw that a bit more. It's not necessarily the thing I go to first, and I was wondering what you thought about that, Jim.
Well, it's interesting because you even see they literally have a prism. The Clairefoy is the governess.
Yes.
I believe her name is Elizabeth. But Clairefoy is the governess. Actually is teaching the girls, the younger siblings, about light. And
Emily.
The light. And, yes. And they have a scene where the lesson ends and the light through the prism is just left on. And so you see this for a good minute or two. So and
there's a bit of a flourish when he's in and she's taken off, and then like a flash through the prism, which was kind of a moment.
And just one quick note too is that I actually started investing time into get back the Beatles, just as you're mentioning this, and it all basically takes the first 25-hour long episode. It takes place in Twickenham Studios, and they're basically, the lighting behind them is all just a sort of a prism. Primary colors, and that's kind of that's another thing. It just sort of came up accidentally this weekend for us. So
Okay, shall we move into story?
2 more notes here. I just want to say,
are they relevant to
Craft?
Yeah.
Well, just sort of the acting bit.
Yeah.
Getting Nick Cave to be H.G. Wells is super fun. The Australian rocker who actually looks like one of the managers at the local Safeway. But anyway, and then there's another actor. If you watch a lot of English television, you might notice him. His name's Adil Akhtar, and he was
Adil, my man.
Sorry,
I've been a smart ass. Continue.
But he
Please
played
continue.
the man who gave Louis his first paid gig as painting Cleopatra the Pomeranian, and then he comes around again at the end. And I've always enjoyed. He's a really I like his presence in movies. He's sort of a calming figure, and I'd like to see him do more stuff. But he's in a lot of English television.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into. On that note, let's get into story. Where am I here? Story, my friends. Jim, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Just taking a look at my notes here. Well, in terms of story, it it follows the beats of it basically covers the life of a man who lives to be 80, and it covers a lot of the main beats. Of course, you sort of are left with big gaps in the time, so it brings up important aspects. Him starting out, him getting a job with the London Illustrated News, meeting the love of his life, and having a very pleasant 6 months apparently until she's diagnosed with terminal breast cancer, and then that's basically the
they
first
were married
half
for
of the
3
movie.
years.
Was it 3 years? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think she said
the diagnosis may have come in early, but
yeah.
they were,
Okay.
Yeah, she died
Altogether
3 years after they're married. Yeah.
Which, I mean, admittedly, that sucks. But anyway, because you have two sort of, kind of oddballs that find each other and take great pleasure in each other's company. And it seemed,
and a character
movie,
who can tell him, can say, I have cancer.
Yes.
I am, I'm tired, which I thought was a great moment.
Yeah.
Great beat.
Yeah. And at the same time, without sort of, being a big wedge, right? She's honest with him. And then it sort of goes on into what happens with the rest of his life, involvement with cats, and like it with a lot of lives. It seems, for me, the last hour seemed kind of like random, almost like life is often. You walk into a meeting, you end up with a job that leads you over here and changes the course of your life a little bit. So for me though, just the episodicness maybe took away a little bit of the impact from it. I would much have preferred to see like a more constrained or a thinner slice of his life, some major point in his life. And they did talk about him going out over the States and coming back. The issue that the scene that Rob and I were talking about earlier is when he often has dreams of drowning even as a child. So he's on the ship, and basically it's the ship in his mind is sinking and he's going to drown, and he gets all the panic and everything else
and he can't get out of the room and
can't get out of the room, starts freaking out. And all of a sudden a porter opens the room, and all you see is him standing. There's a little bit of water on the floor because the sink's been running, and he's sort of sobbing there. He's wet himself. And the poor porter, he's got like a big stick as if he's going to have to beat this guy down. And so that's sort of that
truly a great moment.
Yeah. And granted, a lot of movies would, you might make that a confrontation scene, but the porter just goes, what am I doing here? He basically just responds with some confusion, which is a nice choice. And then they cut it, and then they go on to the next bit. But
and it captured a great moment of fear. Like you felt for him.
Mm-hmm. And he's calling for his mommy and his daddy, and basically
just want somebody to help him.
Going back to the source, comfort. like Marie, his younger, she had nightmares that were that vivid too. I don't know if they classified as night terrors or what have you, but
well, and it was also even her feelings at the time. I don't think it was just a nightmare. She was feeling, she had a physical manifestation.
Oh, yes,
and I think that was kind of the hint of future mental health issues.
Yeah. I mean, also too is that when you take a biopic and you take an entire life, you can basically, whatever step you take, you're creating a narrative frame, right? So you can take the whole thing and say, oh, his life, it ended really at 50 and he had a last horrible 30 years. They try to sort of put it in, they kind of wrap a little bit of a bow around it. This gentleman that he met in his youth sort of comes back, finds him, and brings him to a nicer institution, basically. That's by the sea.
Historically,
cats.
He became almost like a cause celeb.
Yeah.
In that, why is he in this, like his sisters, I guess, had a hard time, Jim, managing him, and so he was committed, but they can't afford, the nice place, which you could argue is a comment on, mental health services now. But it was found out a lot of it certainly did not happen the way it was presented in the film, with this wonderful, he's marching through the streets collecting nickels and, oh, Squire, I have a copper. But you know what? It became a cause célèbre. H.G. Wells did say those words on radio. That's a fucking quote. Anyway, and so to get him into a new institution where, the treatment's more humane. Anyway, sorry.
No, I'm just saying that
I'm not sure about the service cats, but
well, I was just going to say that you can sort of take the story and take various points from it and come up with your own conclusions. You're the one writing it. You can come up with your own narrative arc, and even make it a hard story, a sad story, and ultimately slightly victorious story. In spite of everything, he battled on and found some success. That kind of thing. You can basically, it's a 2-hour chunk of an 80-year-long life. So that's sort of an exercise in itself. And I think they chose to be, I guess, mildly, not victorious is the right word, but they painted it a little nicer. The final shot is of him surrounded by beauty, basically, incorporating something that I wish they'd incorporated more of, is a sort of a vision of this painted meadow, this sort of almost this gaudy, along the lines of the cats that he drew, this sort of pretty meadow picture, like a Bob Ross kind of landscape almost. But
what did you think of the flow of the movie? Like, as far as going through those phases, because so many biopics can feel episodic. I think this kind of had a nicer, smoother flow. But what did you think?
It did, but it still was episodic, and I'll have to. I don't know. I'll have to go back through some movies, the ones that tend to focus on thinner strips of a famous person's life. The Spielberg Lincoln movie, maybe The Iron Lady. I think I'd maybe have to watch those again just to sort of see a more like a concentrated part of somebody's life rather than the full scope. Because I always look forward to biopics, and often I'm sort of left wanting because they can be episodic. I mean, it's just sort of the nature of the product, right? This one, the flow wasn't too bad, but I really felt that with the absence of Claire Foy in the second half of the movie, I don't know. I didn't look at the minute at what point she passed on, but let's say half. It really that was the engine that ran the start of the movie, and it really wasn't replaced by anything too. So that was a little bit of a problem to overcome. Again, I sort of wanted more scenes with him and his Marie, his mentally ill sister, but she didn't really have that many lines. She portrayed it well, but I sort of wish she had been given more screen time.
Yeah. You know what, Jim? I'm going to disagree with you there. I think, I guess we're not talking about craft. We're talking about the story. We're still talking about the story. One of the, another movie that had a similar marriage was Goodbye, Mr. Chips. His wife is in it for all of 10 minutes, maybe not even that much, but it has weight in my mind. And it's a great pivot. It's a great character development moment. It's a great pivot. And I think that's what they're going for. And I think for the most part, it was quite effective. And also kind of captured the idea. It's like, yeah, this was a very important episode in his life, but it wasn't his whole life. The other thing you could do is maybe, because what is the other option? You make it all about their marriage.
Yeah.
Then you give short shrift to his later years. You do some, like you say, Jim, you do some bit at the end where you kind of go, well, struggled with mental health. That continued. Let's put it on the sisters, or the sisters tried, or you know what? Whereas here it's like, yes, this was a formative moment. And we are left, I think, effectively left with that. I wonder how it would have been if she didn't get sick. Could she have been that stabilizing force that kind of dialed down some of the stress, or, of him being the paterfamilia because of the era they're in. So yeah, I honestly, Jim, I was okay with that. I think the way they took slices was right to kind of give a more honest capture of this man's life. Whereas a lot of these things where it's like, okay, you're going to sugarcoat something. You want to end it on a high. I'm thinking of Bohemian Rhapsody. It's like, it's like, no, there are points where they're harder to look at, like his suffering in the second half of the movie. Cause it's like a up, and then you have that, everything's changing. Cause she dies at the midpoint of the film. Like we're all like, oh, this is, and I love the Olivia Colman moment where she's like, I know you'd hope to, he did this and this happened. And well, yeah, that's not the story. Loved it. And I thought it was a great place to turn the story. It doesn't take away from the impact in us as the audience and on him. I think it makes it even more poignant that there was this time when he was, connected to someone else in that way. It worked for me. There's my 2 cents on that. Back to you, Jim. Back to you.
Yeah.
Anything else on story before I give you my, before I just kind of close it off a bit?
No, I just, there's some, I guess if she comes in and she's so vivid and she's got such a presence, is that inevitably, and it's it's a product of the, you're dealing with real life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really mess up, I mean, it's not a documentary at the same time, but when she's gone, I you feel her absence. Maybe you're supposed to as well, but that because that relationship was so vivid and touching, really. You get these two dingbats that kind of find each other, and she's a little bit off, he's a little bit off. I mean, he's offer than she is, if I can say that word, but that's sort of a nice not nice, it's a vivid part of the movie, I should say. And then when she's gone, right? And Toby Jones says, these are precious weeks, appreciate them. So.
Yeah, no, and I do. I think that's, we'll get more into the meaning later. For myself, Jim, and there are some things I had a problem with story-wise. In general, I was fine with everything, and it made sense. It's like, beginning, middle, end. And we've watched movies where we might have liked it, but it's like, oh, that's a gaping plot hole, or that doesn't make any sense, or hey, has the movie started yet? We're halfway through.
Yeah.
In this, doesn't have any of those problems. I do, and I'm going to go back to Andrea Riseborough. I don't think Marie is as important a character. I think Andrea Riseborough's character, the sister, just a sec here, Caroline Wain. We could have had more time, especially in the second half of the movie with her, like up to the end, up until literally her deathbed, she comes across as kind of a shrew. And it's like, this is not to say that her being a shrew is some terrible thing. I'm not, that maybe the woman was like that, or maybe they're like, no, we're going to write her as a shrew. But she obviously goes through a change. And I think if we saw her a little more, where we could kind of say, yeah, this woman does, like, we've got this great, or what could have been a great and truly touching, like a lot more impactful scene near the end, on her deathbed, where she says she's proud of him, and he actually sees some of the evidence of that. But if we saw some more hints on the way that she was this, that she did love her brother, that she, because I understand her frustration with him, putting it in its historical context and everything. But a little more of her then could have made more sense and could have felt better. You know what? That to show that even as they're struggling with him, as he has these one crisis after another, and it looks like a lot of times it does, right? That these crises speed up, and to see her struggling with that while she's trying to hold a family together, under all those social restrictions, just a little bit of that, a little bit of the, I'm struggling, but I sympathize. I think if we had a bit more of her, it would have landed, that scene would have, felt more. And who knows, they might have been trying to go, well, you're not going to see that because we want you to realize it when he realizes it. But I think we as the audience can see those moments. You can create just a couple of moments where you see her caring and him not noticing, whereas it's like, no, she's shrew to, that's
a good point.
The other thing, and this is just a quick aside for you and the chat, is Andrea Riseborough, like, are we, it's almost like she's developed a specialty. And is it by choice or is it by just typecasting? But a specialty for being that a woman on the outside, a bit of a pill. I'm thinking, the third, the shitty third in a love triangle, Oblivion. Is it Oblivion with Tom Cruise and good Lord, what is that woman's name? Porskova? No, that's. Holy shit, that's way 80s. But do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just kind of curious what you thought of that. And
well, no, that's a great point. And she comes in so strong that it's almost and maybe that's probably a director's choice to have her come in, but she's so like in his face. He goes out at night and she comes in and like over the top screaming at him, and it's we're trying to establish her as the sort of the de facto leader of the household, but well,
and mind you, let's why is she like that? Why was she there? Because she was already up with the younger sister, trying to calm her down, trying to give her comfort,
Yeah.
So she may be just like, again, a little more time with her, and we could kind of have some sort of like, yes, she's an antagonist, but she's not the bad guy,
Yeah. Brian's agreeing with you, Oblivion. But yeah, no, I even had, I said villains. I
Thanks,
was
guys.
like Mrs. Dufresne.
Olga Kurilenko. Thanks, Matt.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Villains, I had Caroline, question mark, Mrs. Dufresne, question. That was early moments in the movie,
Yeah.
where I'm just trying to figure out where it's going. But
yeah.
I just think she came in too hard, and the end wasn't really earned, and it could have been.
We just need a little bit of time with her. I think would have been would have been more successful.
Sometimes it's one scene.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's one scene that can make the difference in this, and just a little connector tissue, and that would do the trick. So,
right. Before we go on, Jim, anything else you want to add before I would love to catch up a bit with the chat, but is there something else you want to add regarding
just
story?
A couple little points, like just there's just a little bit of a background that as I mentioned before, that weirdness in the movie. They were sort of covering the bases, like a lot of biopics do, telling you when people died. When Toby, is it? I always think it's Toby Young or Toby Jones. But when Toby Jones's character dies in old age, it's not much of a surprise here. As Sir William Ingram, he's just face down in a plate of food at that place that he has lunch at
his club, probably
at his club. Yeah. And just that sort of the vividness of him being face down in a plate of food is that sort of like just that little hint of weirdness that sort of runs like a little bit of icing, right in the middle of the cake, right through this whole movie. And that I kind of like little bits that seemed visionary and inspiring to me. Just those little details, not necessarily just having a guy dead at his lunch table, but just this kind of thing that they added. And everyone sort of gathered around. But
I'm glad you brought that up, because it occurred to me just then. It's like, because Toby, Sir William Ingram, the paper owner, he started where you're like, oh, okay, is this a bad guy who exploits him, etc.? And they really do. They play with it a little, but in the end, you're like, they spend enough time together, and we get to know him where it's like, he's not a dick. He's not. He is Louis's friend, and that is, so they give him that. So that that's what we needed, a little bit, just a taste for Caroline, so we can kind of go, the reason she's such a pill is she's under all this pressure, but that she loves her family. She's not just this nasty shrew,
Yeah. In that day and age too, that had so many fucking rules about God knows what, like just say everyone's in each other. What are they doing in that room? That's not their room. Like, fuck off. People looking, seeing what you're doing, and that would drive me crazy. But Toby Jones, if anybody watches The Detectorists, what a great show that is. But he's a good one. Drag movie guy just says love Toby Jones there. So
I did now I pinned this comment, Jim. Matt as a person with several mental illnesses and thus living as a member of the mental illness underclass, he could answer some questions about mental health and low class status. As you know, I suspect most of you know, I think I even referred to it in, it was when we were talking about, because I had also praised a futile and stupid gesture for its its take on mental illness. That it's out as somebody myself who struggles with depression, has for decades, but so let's I wouldn't mind hearing specifically from Matt as far as, and I think this is a story element before we get into the meaning of the piece, but I think this is a story element. Did he find the portrayals of these crises as as realistic as it, realistic, or better than average, maybe not. Stars, was there any eye pokers there? So Matt, if you could chime in on that, I'd love to hear that. He did make a comment, and I think I'll try and pin that for later, regarding neurodivergent versus mental illness, and that's something I'll come on later. But and there's DMG. Short Shrift was originally Indiana Jones' sidekick in Temple of Doom until they changed it. Short Shrift, that's terrible. Nevertheless, he persisted. Okay, bear with me, guys. I'm just trying to find this comment so I remember it. Oh, and also want to correct everyone one more time. Nick Cave, not Nick Cage.
Oh, did I say Cage?
No, you said Cave. I think a couple of folks in the chat, and I was like, Nick Cave, because everyone's, Nicolas Cage was in it? Wow, that was a great makeup, blah, blah. It was like this little chat, and I'm like, no. Nicolas Cage is not an Australian rocker. Nick Cave.
He's in literally every movie. I should point out, too, that there was a couple other cameos that we didn't touch upon. Taika Waititi has about a minute on screen, as does very different look, Richard Ayoade, who people might know from the IT Crowd and the Travel Man series that you can find on Gem. CBC Gem, super funny guy. My wife and I are constantly wondering why he doesn't have a bigger career. He's hilarious, but just a couple of tiny little cameos there.
Yeah,
nice surprise. Anyway,
all right.
One other thing about story too, I just want to say, as a freelance writer, and I haven't been doing tons of writing lately, but one of the interesting things is there's a little bit of a crisis, an economic crisis. I think just before his wife passes away, that Sir William comes to Louis Wain and says,
has to cut his hours back, basically.
This new thing, this picture box that they've created, it gives us these so-called photographs, and he says, this is the newest big thing. We're going to have to cut your assignments.
Yeah.
And it's funny to see that, especially in this day and age of huge, and Brian might appreciate this too, media downturn or fewer jobs and sort of
media restructuring, really.
Yeah, and how the media industry changes over time. Even back then, you had guys who drew pictures that were, as soon as the cameras came in, they were out on their ass, and I mean, there still is a slight tradition of drawing. You see it in courthouse sketches, that sort of thing, but certainly not to the extent that there used to be. So that's an interesting note, is that what's the changes being constant, I guess, especially even with the media industry there too. So that was kind of if you've ever felt yourself put out, or if you've lost jobs due to some new technology or something like that as a freelancer, it was
the nature of capitalism
140 years ago as well. Yeah, exactly.
Technology forever going,
Yay.
How can we replace people?
Yeah.
Damn these people and their expense.
Oh, exactly.
And I can't even beat them.
Yeah.
Okay. You know what? Before we move on to meaning, I think there's a great time to beg for a like, folks. Of course, a subscription would be wonderful.
The figure.
And then last but certainly not least, how about a ringy ding of that bell?
Dinner time.
Fantastic.
Technology hasn't replaced this yet.
All right. I want to draw attention. We're going to move into meaning. I want to draw attention. Matt's got a few more detailed comments regarding crises and how they feel from the perspective of someone going through it, and some analogies. But he also makes an interesting comment. And I've certainly seen this. I am not necessarily a fan of it. I appreciate efforts of pathologizing capitalism. But I'm like, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, well, if maybe we can cure it. And it's like, I don't think capitalism is a thing to be cured. But anyway, he does say this is interesting. Some have also thought of things like economic booms and busts as being like a version of bipolar or manic depression. Booms being the mania, or summer, busts being depression or winter. And I've certainly, it's a great analogy, I think. But yeah, to pathologize capitalism, and it's like, it's why we're forever trying to tweak it. And it's like, I don't know, it has certain of a natural tendency. You know what? And yeah, there's times where it's like, well, it's just a system. We don't need to save it. It's the patient I'm concerned with, us. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's more Marxism with Rob.
Sunrise semester. Good morning, Melonville.
Thank you. All right, the meaning, Jim. Mind if I go first?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
All right. For myself on this one, I got to admit, I do think, it's got a few things to say. Certainly overtly about mental illness, and they are trying. And again, chime in when you feel like it, Matt, on the realism of it. But I think they are trying to provide not just a sympathetic view, but not you know what, Jim, not a romantic view or even a retrograde view. Like, it's one of the things I have a hard time with the Queen's Gambit. This comes out in the first episode. If you haven't seen it already, well, here comes a spoiler. Plug your ears. This idea that, the kids, in a neglected, the main character starts in an orphanage, neglected, strict, different time, where they were tranquilizing the children. I'm not sure if there's a historical reference, like they got historical backup. But anyway, she starts kind of hoarding it so she gets super high, and it's how she teaches herself chess, which is very similar to it's his crazy that makes him do this brilliant stuff, when so much research has clearly related to, it's the crazy hinders the creativity. It doesn't enhance it. It's not of course he's a mad genius, and it's just fucking bullshit. And it's been proven, especially Hollywood, a ton of crazies. But you know what? The folks where they're like, nope, lithium saved my life. Lithium is the reason I've been able to generate script after script or great performances or because they could manage those crises instead of saying, oh, it's the crises that makes them brilliant. When they're on, they're on. Which is, and you see that for depression. Well, he's a depressed genius. And it's like, how much more Van Gogh could we have got if he had, is able to manage these crises, manage those things, and so I think they are trying to show that without being too heavy-handed. The other thing, the tragedy, yes, they can, there's a moment where they're trying to restrain him for all intents and purposes, whether or not his crises was started out where he was already being violent or they were, who knows. But most of the time, it's that moment of in the ship where he's just bereft and, crying and lost. And I thought that was part of the meaning of this film. I think, and maybe it's a bit of a missed opportunity. Again, I will now say once again, why didn't we see more of Caroline, more of Andrea Riseborough? But there is and I think Matt even refers to a bit of this in his own, in sharing his own story with us. He comes from an upper middle class home, but because of his mental health challenges, he's dependent upon public support. And I think a little bit more of Caroline, and we could have really seen as the restrictions of that time were such that this whole family had to depend on him. They couldn't just, so there's a gender thing going on there. There's also the economics of, well, you're all on your own. Even they literally pointed out later, I think it's about the third act, Jim, where they say to Olivia Colman says, I think in some of the narration about, well, yeah, because already Louis is a known eccentric. Then the daughter the youngest gets committed. The other three, because that's their only economic security is marriage because of so many restrictions, they are doomed, doomed to penury, doomed to poverty. Maybe not the poverty of, some working class wretch out of Manchester, like my mother's forebears, but still, and I think it just a little bit more from Caroline could have really captured that super well, because you intellectualize it and you kind of see, yeah, I know why she's frustrated and upset, the lack of knowledge at the time, even now, right? I can't tell you how many people say, can't you just get your shit together? It's like, yeah, it doesn't work that way. I'm depressed. I'm fucking depressed. It's not a switch. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I leave that off? Here, let me flick that off. Everything's fine now. So I have some sympathy for that. But I think that's part of what was going on here, even just talking about those gender roles. And maybe, yeah, of course, a deep love of cats. No way you're making this movie if you're not a cat person. What about you? What am I missing there, Mr. Chaboyko?
I think, a movie being about art, it has a lot to do with looking and seeing, and in spite of everything, they talk directly about it, in spite of everything that the world challenges you with, it's still a beautiful place. I think it's that sort of a philosophical acceptance that life is going to be hard, but it's also going to be beautiful. And I think that's sort of the one, for me, that's what comes through. It's even the sort of the point of the final shot of the picture. And it's something that Claire Foy's Emily hammers home to him. They're talking and he's basically thanking her for existing in the first place. And she said, he says, you make the world more beautiful. And she, it was a nice little counter. She said, it's not me. It already is beautiful.
Yes.
And so I think there's that's sort of an important philosophical, that's one of the places on which this movie rests.
Yeah.
That in spite of it all, the world's a beautiful place. And it just, some people can see it. Some people can to look for it, look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another important point. You're absolutely right, Jim. I'm still putting a question mark on it, and I know it kind of put a pin in it. I don't, there's no realistic, like the only time you really see working class people, especially at the end in the neighborhood they're in, with the walking down with a, which is like, oh yes, everyone was celebrating cats. And again, I've got a copper for you. So I really, that just rubs me the wrong way. Like I'm a cat and they're pushing up on my back, that said, there is perhaps a little bit of subtle criticism of capitalism as it is now, our economy as it is now. What was one of the other interesting moments, they're talking about copyright and that he didn't copyright his early work. And And he says, no one told me, which almost is like a criticism of the education system at the time, because it looks like he was educated as some sort of gentleman. But again, that sort of like, what that capitalist ethic of you're all on your own, figure it out.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't know that? That's your fault. That very much, you can't blame ignorance. It's your problem. And so there might have been a subtle thing there, but yeah, you're right. Like there's a comment on beauty. I think one of the most lovely images, and we actually see a painting, and I didn't get a chance to examine it in the credits. I hope it's like a real one, but there's that moment, him and Claire Foy, it's basically at the midpoint or just before the midpoint. She's saying, when I'm gone, I want you to come here to remember me. Or when you need to remember me. And then they're at that great meadow
sort of
pond thing, very super British. And then they cut to the what I think is the picture as we see them from the back. And it's truly beautiful, and it's heart, it's how art can give you that feeling. Bring that feeling to you, which, now I'm getting a little misty, a little choked up, Jim. You know what? Again, like by the end of the movie, I was like, oh, that was, and even heartwarming. They give us a happy ending, he was still struggling, but at least he was in a better situation, and maybe not as good as they describe it. But probably infinitely better than where they found him initially,
Yeah. And that's that sort of narrative frame that you can sort of play around with a little bit as a writer.
Yeah. So, okay. Anything else you want to add to meaning, Jim, before we...
just regarding capitalism, there's that, when they're trying to raise funds at one point, I just put GoFundMe ? That's
not fix the hospital that he was in. Say, we just need to. No, the rest can stay there. Fuck them.
Yeah.
That's
first
a great
ever GoFundMe campaign.
And there is which is why, okay, now I'm more comfortable with my no class consciousness. It's kind of like when we see these heartwarming stories on the internet about how the community came around, and it's like, why not just fix it? These are human problems. Just fix it. How you hear, especially, it's something that's unheard of here now, but down in the States, it's like, I couldn't imagine an employer coming around and going, Mildred's pregnant. We're all chipping in a day of our vacation to help her out. What the fuck? And that they make a virtue of it, and there's a little bit of that, because it's like, there's a parade. Oh, well, I'll contribute to this fund, not to change how the circumstances of everyone in these institutions, but we'll change the circumstances of one man who was gentry and is being treated so poorly, and he should serve his last life as though he was gentry again. And it's like, oh, for fuck's sakes. Yeah, I'm a lot more comfortable with my it is not class conscious now. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah.
Appreciate that GoFundMe reference. All right. Let's get back into the two shot. Get rid of that meaning reference. And Jim, I think it's that time we talk about oh my goodness, where the heck is it? Apparently I forgot to put it on here.
Oh. We can describe it.
Well, I can here. Well, why don't you? Yeah, you know what, Jim? Please tell us what the. Oh wait, I found it. The next movie. Why don't you tell us what the next movie is?
Starring John Boyega, Olivia Cook, Bill Skarsgård, Ed Skrein, who you might know from Deadpool, Linda Lavin, and Tim Blake Nelson.
Really?
We are
Wow.
looking at Naked Singularity,
Another
the latest John Boyega movie.
yeah, and another
Directed.
one on Amazon Prime. It's an Amazon
Prime.
Studios film. Yeah, an
They're
Amazon
practically employees.
original.
There you go.
So yeah, we'll be watching that next week, or watching that for next week. Of course, what will the date be? Oh, the 12th, December 12th, 9:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time.
Yeah.
Universal Coordinated Time -6 for those of you folks outside the Central American time zone. All right.
Do you have, it says on the poster, I don't know if you can read it, the justice system is criminal. John Boyega's holding a samurai sword. So I'm thinking it's not a two-hander kitchen sink drama.
No, this is a little more, and I suspect it may make the class consciousness cut. The basic, he plays a criminal defense lawyer. Kind of loses it because his folks are getting screwed. He does go to commit a crime, maybe a revolutionary component to it.
Nice.
But, lawyer with a samurai sword, samurai lawyer. Yes. Now all of a sudden I'm thinking of John Belushi and old SNL.
I think it's getting away from us.
All right. Which was why we should talk about the director, Mr. Will Sharpe. Will, and I want to highlight this, not so Will Tomomori Fukuda Sharpe. He is a Japanese English actor, writer, and director. He's Black Pond, The Darkest Universe, Flowers are some of his previous works. Anyway, what you giving him a pass or a fail, Jim?
I'll give him a pass. Like I said, it bit episodic, that kind of thing. I have a few minor issues with this. It's a smaller movie, but I think it was nicely told. A couple interesting points about him. His wife plays Sylvie, Loki's romantic interest in the Loki series.
Oh, Sophia DiMartino. You're right. Yes.
Yeah.
Huh.
And And I was thinking, I don't know too many other English Japanese folks, but I guess Kazuo Ishiguro is also English Japanese. So anyhow, there's two in my Wikipedia category for English Japanese artists. But anyway, I think he passed.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I give him a pass. Let's take a quick scan at the chat. Bear with me here. Doesn't look like anyone's disagreeing with us. Although Matt does ask a question. He says, now, is this about the technological singularity or a black hole, the gravitational singularity?
Ooh.
Neither. I believe it is a metaphor.
We should watch the black hole at some point.
Does it hold up? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we should. Renew my Disney subscription for that.
Oh, it would be on that too.
It is.
That's awesome.
It is on that. Because
I
started it briefly once. It was like, oh yeah, no, Jim's right. We should do this one. And I think I even have a slot for it. All right, folks. So Director Jim, why don't you throw down your final thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, sort of, two different a movie of two halves. And I think necessarily so. I did sort of prefer the first half, but I can see where the second half was necessary. The guy's life actually, changed after his wife died. But I would have liked a little bit more focus, a little bit more of the spirit that you see in the poster there. It could have been a little more committed to that end. But then again, it might have been come across as too weird. But still, little flashes, sort of. Not your typical British period piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, I quite liked it. If you're a completist when it comes to Benedict Cumberbatch, you obviously have to watch this one. But it's a pretty good entry into what he's able to do.
No, that's a great point, Jim. Would you? Oh, good grief! I'm in final thoughts here. Why have I not put that up? Who would you recommend this to? How would you, maybe not who? How would you recommend it?
That's a good question. And I was thinking about this earlier. Is that were we talking about it, or was somebody else talking about it? Just in the stuff that I've been reading. It like teens, I think would this would be a good. Would it be a family movie night movie? Like there's nothing sort of lurid about it. I don't think at any point. And it has the scope of a life lived, right? Like Bart Simpson says when he's playing the Destroy the State Capitol video games. Wait a minute, I'm learning things. So, yeah, I mean, it might be this is something I think that the family could watch together, or just if you're into period pieces, people, historical buffs. This is a guy I didn't know anything about going in. In fact, I thought Electrical Life, I thought he, when I learned it was partially about mental illness, I thought it was would refer eventually to shock treatment.
Shock therapy.
It didn't.
Yeah.
Shock therapy. I thought that was the sort of the natural, but it was just based on his own theory of life. But yeah, I think anybody who's into history, art, that kind of thing.
Brief moment from Taika Waititi, who's playing an actual historical figure.
Yes,
Max Case, an actual what would have been at the time referred to as a newspaper man. All right, everyone. Again, I think first of all, why don't again I'll remind everyone we are next watching Naked Singularity. Looking forward to this one too. DMG referred to in the chat something about the 13 Days of Christmas. Kicking off next week, I suppose. Anyway, 9:30 p.m. next Sunday, December 12th, Central Daylight Time, Universal Coordinated Time, -6. And I think that's about it, other than just saying goodbye to our wonderful folks in the best chat on the internet, another active night. First, Matt with a couple of Simpsons bon mots. I'm learning from Mr. Welfrigham. And me fail English? That's impossible. That's impossible. That's impossible. All right. So Matt, thank you very much for joining us. DMG, Brian, always a pleasure seeing you in the chat, and looking forward to you back on the show soon, no later than December 27th, which is the last show of this year. Where
Winnipeg going to the Grey Cup, Brian. Even though we lost the turnover battle 6-1, believe it or not, look it up. Anyway.
There you go, Brian. DMG, thank you very much. What else? Who else are we? And I may be reaching out to you because, of course, the next couple of weeks, folks, we are also going to be talking about, Jim and I are going to kind of take a look first at our favorite 5 movies that we covered on this show. Over the last year. And then we're going to take some time in a later episode to talk about what we're looking forward to next year. And we might even do an extra, like a bonus show somewhere in there about talking about some of the news stories of the year and how we think that'll play out next year. What else? Okay. So yes, DMG, thank you. Richard L., thank you very much. Katie Fowler, again, thank you for coming out. Yes. 2/3 of the Research Street Irregulars. I know maybe you'll be listening to this later. Walt, thanks again for bringing up that Slash Film piece. Appreciate that. And Jelly Duck. Ahmed, great to see you here. I'm sure you're off to work already by now, but still, it's good seeing you, man. So yeah, I think that's about it. Let's yeah, I'm not sure, Matt. He's referring to Naked Singularity. Anyway, everybody, thank you all very, very much for coming in. We really appreciate that, and we look forward to having you back. I will hopefully have fixed our background so it refers to the movie that we're actually talking about instead of a movie from a couple of weeks ago. But it was great. Again, thank you all very much for coming. Thanks for joining us. This is wonderful. And yeah, I think that's about it, eh, Jim?
Go Bombers.
Here, I think, all right. Okay, goodbye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cats are people too.
You're absolutely right.
Just kidding.